All right, welcome back. Now, away from population issues to another issue of national importance. The Nigerian government is proposing a lower budget estimate for 2019. The Federal Executive Council is proposing 8.73 trillion for next year, which is 400 billion naira lower than the 9.1 trillion naira approved for 2018. The council also agreed to peg the price of crude oil per barrel at $60, exchange rate at 305 naira, daily crude oil production at 2.3 million barrels per day, and expected GDP growth rate put at 3.5%. All of these are part of the medium-term expenditure framework for 2019 to 2021, which usually serves as a precursor to the budget. Aside from the difference in the overall figure in the 2018 budget, the 2019 MTEF still retains most of the key assumptions from the 2018 budget. The exchange rate, for instance, daily crude oil production, and expected GDP growth rate are the same figure. Now, only the price of oil was raised from $51 to $60 per barrel. Nigeria is aiming to cut down on its high budget deficit and borrowing, so it's really not a surprise that we might be seeing a lower budget estimate in 2019 compared to the 2018 figures. It must be noted, however, that the medium-term expenditure framework is still just a planning process of the budget, and the figures can still change before the budget is submitted to the National Assembly later this year. But joining me now to discuss this latest document is Muda Yusuf, who is the Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Industry and Commerce. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us on the program. First off, this figure now released by the Minister of Budget and National Planning, does it come to you as a surprise that we're planning to lower the budget for next year?
No, it did not come to me as a surprise because increasingly we are beginning to see that the capacity to fund the budget has been declining. And that is what has created the current challenge of debt sustainability. And at least in the last couple of years, the government has been thinking of how to deal with this issue of debt. You know, there was this proposal to rebalance the debt, switching from domestic to foreign, because as we speak, about 70% of the debt stock is domestic debt. And if you look at the amount that we have committed to servicing the debt, it's really very high. In 2018 budget, for instance, the allocation to debt service was 2 trillion naira. That was about 40% of our revenue, and it's quite a lot. It's quite a lot. So, having regard to all these issues, the revenue capacity, there's a plan to raise revenue, but we haven't made so much progress in that. I think the worst thing to do is also to cut down on the budget size, because clearly the debt situation as it is not sustainable. And unfortunately, there is very little to show for the debt that has been accumulating. Currently, the debt stock is about $72 billion US, so an equivalent of 22 trillion naira. Of course, this is a combination of the states and federal budget. Of course, the federal government has a much bigger share, close to 70% of this debt stock. So I think it's part of the strategy of also dealing with the issue of debt and coming to the reality that these numbers are no longer sustainable. I think that is what has informed the reduction in the budget size.
But what do you make of the key benchmarks now that the minister talked about? I mean, he issued those key benchmarks, basically the same with the exception of the price of oil, which is pegged at $60 per barrel. You think everything is fine that way?
No, I have some reservations about the benchmark. The oil benchmark of $60 per barrel looks okay, looks conservative, given the current context of the global economy and the geopolitical issues around the world. Currently, oil price is in the threshold of 80, although it dropped slightly in the last few days to around 75. But $60 per barrel looks okay, it looks conservative enough. Because if you are budgeting, especially on the revenue side, you have to be as conservative as possible. The oil output assumption looks to me to be optimistic. We are looking at 2.3 million barrels per day.
Yeah.
I had thought that an assumption of about 2 million barrels would have been more like it. I don't forget that in the last quarter, the figures of GDP that we got, one of the areas that caused the decline was the decline in oil output. So I think to be on the safe side, it would have been nice to just stay with a more conservative assumption as far as the oil output is concerned. Now, the assumption on foreign exchange rates, I think that is, I don't think that is right. It's not, it doesn't look realistic. It's not in line with the current realities. Over the past 1 year or so, exchange rate has been around 360, slightly over 360, and in some other markets maybe around 340, 350. But to peg it at 305, I think will be understating the naira revenue that should come into the federation account, especially from the foreign inflow component of the revenue. If we are translating the dollar revenue with an exchange rate of 305, I think that will be shortchanging the various tiers of government, and that will be understating.
By the way, I mean, it has always been this way, but what exactly, in your own opinion, what exactly is the logic of pegging the exchange rate at 305 when in the actual sense of the word, especially in the market, in the market, we know that, for instance, the exchange rate is somewhere around 360?
Well, I think the CBN is in a better position to answer that. Because for all practical purposes, all the people in business, nobody ever gets anything close to 305. In some of the, because we have various segments of the market, the best people get is around 350, 355, and so on. Nobody ever gets the 305. So it is not clear to me any player in the economy that is a beneficiary of the 305. So I don't think it's appropriate to retain the 305 as a benchmark for purposes of budgeting. Just as I said, it understates the naira equivalent of our foreign exchange earnings. So I think it is better to adjust it to reflect the reality of the exchange rate. The GDP growth rate of 3% is also
3.5%.
3.5 is also optimistic in my view. If you look at the situation so far, at the last quarter we were talking about 1.5% GDP growth rate, and that was even a decline. And looking at the trajectory, the environment is not as rosy and as conducive as to be optimistic that we will have a GDP growth rate of about 3%. So that again, I think, should have pegged it at a more conservative level of around 2%, 2.5. And in any case, what matters to the average Nigerian is not even so much the numbers, it is about how inclusive the growth is and how impactful the growth of the economy is on the lives of the people, basic needs and all of that. So that is my view about the assumptions of the that is contained.
You did talk about, let me just quickly ask you, because you did talk about it when you were speaking generally on the MTEF now. Let's talk about this issue of revenue. Whether we like it or not, it's always the biggest headache government has, generating the needed revenue to fund the budget. From what you have seen, not just from this 2018 budget, but say from the budget of 2015 to this period, what do you think the government needs to do to generate more funds now to be able to fund the budget and cut down on borrowing?
Well, I think the government needs to muster the political will to deal with some issues. One of the areas in which we have had very serious shortfalls in our revenue projection is independent revenue. Independent revenue has to do with revenues from the revenue generating agencies of government. We are talking about NNPC, we are talking about Central Bank, we are talking about NPA, NEMASA, and a whole lot of them, and NNPC, yeah, and a whole lot of them that generate quite a lot of revenue and that are sitting on very viable commercial assets. The inflow of revenue from these agencies has been far, far below expectation. I think in the 2017 budget, the shortfall from this revenue head was the biggest. It was about 70% shortfall in revenue. And this is one area where we have not been firm enough to ensure that there is proper accountability, to get the managers of these agencies to actually be more accountable and remit what actually is due to the Federation account. So I think if you come with a more effective, more impactful political will to get the revenue generating agencies to remit what they should remit and to also be properly monitored, I am sure that the revenue that will flow in from those areas will be much more than what we are dealing with. Secondly, is the issue of taxation. There has been a lot of talk about low taxation, low tax to GDP ratio, and the rest of it. The reality is that those who are paying tax are largely those who are in the formal sector, those who are in the corporate world. Those are the people who are bearing the greatest burden of taxation. And this, in terms of the number of economic players, may not be more than 20 or 30% of the total economic players in the economy. So we need to come up with a strategy to ensure that all taxable entities are in the tax net. I think that is a major issue that we need to deal with. I mean, we have a large informal sector. We have a lot of high net worth individuals building mansions, riding private jets, you know. Some of them possibly don't even have offices, but at least they are sitting on a lot of wealth. So we should be creative, we should be innovative to deal with this kind of peculiar challenge in terms of taxation. So it's a question of bringing more people into the tax net and also getting those who really have the capacity to pay much more than they are paying. Then we need to address the issue of our oil and gas sector. A huge sum of our resources, a huge percentage of our resources is going into this sector, and we are not capturing, we are not getting the right kind of value from our oil and gas sector. Largely because we have not been very aggressive enough in terms of reforming the sector. The level of accountability is also not good enough. And we have this story about oil subsidy. Now we are being told that we are consuming about 65 million liters per day of PMS. And this is coming with huge sums in terms of subsidy. And all this is happening because of the failure to fix, the inability to fix our refineries, and inability to also push forward the needed reforms, the petroleum industry bill and all of that. We have not made much progress. A lot of leakages in that sector, I think, can be curbed, and that will bring a lot of revenue, much more than even the tax that we are talking about, into the coffers of government. So we need to deal with the oil and gas sector, ensure that we have the right kind of reforms, ensure that we have refineries that refine products, and so that we can put a stop to all the issues associated, transparency issues, leakages issues, associated with the importation of petroleum products. We are perhaps the only OPEC country that imports as much petroleum products as we do today. And the pity of all of this is that now we are reaping a lot of windfall from oil and gas, high oil prices. The bulk of this revenue is flowing back in terms of importation of petroleum products. So we are not actually benefiting as much as we should from these high oil prices. And these are things we should normally leverage upon to be able to drive the growth and diversification of this economy the way we desire.
Well, I can't but agree with you. But very quickly, I know we have talked about this in the past, but I still want us to talk about it. You know, the fact is that the sum total of the Nigerian economy is made up of not just the federal government, but we're talking about 36 states of the Federation and the Federal Capital Territory. And each of these states have their own budget. And the fact is that if people are saying things are difficult now, it's just because in most cases, whether or not we like it, the states are just not performing. And people are not looking at the budgets of the state. People are not looking at the budget performance of these various states. Don't you think it's high time that we began to beam the spotlight on the budgets of the various states to look at how they're performing? Because if these various states perform, then there's no question that the economy of this country will change.
Yes, I agree with you perfectly. The level of accountability at the subnational levels, which the states, is very low. And first, there is no very serious oversight. The state assemblies, in most cases, are like just an extension of the executive arm of government. So the level of accountability that we expect is not there. So there's a major issue with the states. There's a major accountability and transparency issues in the management of resources at the states. So I agree with you. If we do more in terms of getting the states to be more accountable, I think we will get a lot more value from the budgets of the state. But having said that, you should also realize that we are running more or less a unitary system. This is not a federation. A lot of resources also flow from the center. All the resource for most of the states, the IGR is less than 20% of their total revenue.
But then we have to hold these states responsible. If the states are not able to push up their IGR and they're not able to make something substantial out of their IGR, you blame them because nobody is stopping them from doing that.
No, we have an issue. If this was a truly federal state, some of the revenues that are going to the center should actually stay in the state. So that is where the problem is. If you set up as a state, if you encourage a company to come to your state to set up, the company tax that company pays doesn't come to the state, it goes to the federal government. It goes not to the federal government, it goes to the federation account. The VAT that is paid goes to the center. The education tax that is paid goes to the center. If it is a mining entity, the royalty and the rest that is paid goes to the center. So if you have this kind of structure, of course you have deprived the states of even areas in which they will have also generated their own revenue. So we have to be holistic in this matter. While we agree that the states may not be accountable enough, we should also insist that as part of the totality of restructuring the system, there are elements of revenue that should remain with the states. The states cannot be working so hard to create an enabling environment for businesses, to bring investors, to bring manufacturers, to bring mining industries, and almost 80% of the revenue that comes from these enterprises go to the central pool. So where is the incentive for even the states to drive for more revenue? And whereas you have many states who don't worry about attracting investment, all of them will share from this pool. So there is something that is not equitable about the way we are running the system. The states may have their own fault, but their situation has been further compounded by the structure of the federation. It's more of a unitary structure. Most of the resources that normally should reside in the states are going to the central pool, which is not good. So we need to address the issue of the capacity of the states from the angle of the restructuring and removing some of these issues on the exclusive list so that the states can be more encouraged to drive more to attract investment. I think that is also part of the problem, apart from the fact that some of the states are also not doing enough, even within the scope of the limited opportunities that they have.
All right, Mr. Yusuf, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Well, that's it on the program, but if you want to watch it again, it's just simple. Just go to all our social media platforms. You'll see this program there. And of course, you can also watch the program again on our site, our website now. It's www.tv360nigeria.com. And now do go to that website. You'll find this program and lots more there. Well, thank you very much for watching. We'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.